Happy days, happy people, and welcome to another anatomy lecture with Ulu Yoga. My name is Cody, and today we're going to be talking about the nervous system. So for the last couple of lectures, we've spoken more about the physical aspects of the body in terms of joints and more of the external mechanics and architecture of the body. Now we're going a little bit internal to the wiring and how this plays a role in our physical practice of yoga asana, and also how we can use the body to bridge the gap between the mind and the body itself, to bring more relaxation into the life, and to understand a little bit more about how things that go on up here affect us out here, and vice versa. So today we're going to speak about the nervous system, and we're also going to do a lovely little sequence at the end that's going to help us release a very important nerve in the body that I'm sure a lot of you have heard of and are very interested in learning more about, the sciatic nerve, or sciatic nerve, however you would like to pronounce it. But for now, let's just start with a little bit of terms and concepts and just get into what the nervous system is. So the nervous system is pretty much just the electronical feedback and output loop, I guess, that your body kind of runs with. So your body is connected through these tiny little nerve endings that are like these thread-like fibers running through your body that receive information from the external world and also give information into the body so it can act as an organism. So every muscle, every kind of connective tissue as well to a certain degree, the brain itself, they all have the organs, they all have a nerve connected to it, right? A little circuit that stimulates it and sends a little jolt of electricity for it to be engaged, and then also sends feedback back up to the brain whenever there is something going on in it. And this is how we sense things in the outside world and then act based on what we're sensing. So if we go towards a fire, we sense that it's hot and we stop moving towards the fire, or we try to put the fire out. Or to be a bit more physical with it, when we're standing on the ground, we sense that the ground is stable, so we shift our weight into the ground, and we know that there's a feedback coming from the ground that tells us that it's okay to put your weight there. It's why sometimes it can be a little bit weird dealing with yourself when you're out of a space of comfort. And by this I just mean when you're doing things that physically you're not used to sensing. Being upside down, being up in the air, being twisted, things that your body's not used to being in a state of awareness in. The water is another one of them, right? So this is why for some people it's difficult to swim, where they lose a sense of body control when they're in the water. And it's just because the nervous system doesn't know how to react, and you get over anxious and you start to go into involuntary acting rather than guiding your body how you normally would in your day-to-day. And this is why yoga can be so great, because like we said, it brings body awareness. And body awareness is also brain awareness. So when we're talking about the mind in a sense, the brain definitely comes in, right? The mind is definitely something a bit more conceptual or beyond the brain, but the brain is something we can definitely link to the mind. And I have this little saying written on the board here, and it says, your brain is your body and your body is your brain. There's no separation. We can separate it in terms of concepts, but a brain wouldn't be able to work without a body, and the body wouldn't be able to work without a brain of some sorts. And they both influence each other in very similar and sometimes different ways. So we're going to speak firstly from the perspective of the brain, grow outward and come back in, and then speak why nerves are so important, why it's good to keep healthy nerves and what this means, and how also nerves kind of become part of burnout, and what this means and how to prevent that. And then tap into one of the main nerves in our body, the sciatic nerve, and how we can release that, why it needs to be released, and what it does in terms of the body. But first, concepts. So we have the nervous system. The nervous system is essentially broken up into two different bodies, and they're broken up into more. But we're going to start with the two different bodies. So we have the CNS and the PNS. The CNS stands for the central nervous system, which just means it's the center of your nerve hub. It's the hub, the control tower, the guidance of your nervous system. And the peripheral nervous system. Right? The peripheral nervous system is that which deals with the things external to your body. It's a kind of an easy way to think of it. Central nervous system pretty much consists of the spinal cord running up into the brain stem and then the brain itself, right? So this is all the operating mechanics of the internal world. Our brain has different lobes. We could speak about them a little bit. I'll just mention them, but they're not really that necessary for now. If you want to go more in depth into the neuroscience of everything, definitely have a look at the anatomy of the brain and the different functions of the lobes. Again, very hypothetical in terms of these are all kind of hypotheses that have somewhat been proven true, but sometimes it can be different. Again, the brain works like the body works. So even though, yeah, my bicep is kind of the main thing that creates contraction when I do an arm curl, it's not the only thing, right? There's a lot of things happening everywhere else. So the brain's similar. These lobes and their kind of given functions are not as localized as sometimes anatomy textbooks and neuroscientists make it out to believe. I mean, some will believe that it is very localized, and then this is also just my opinion from research. But this is the thing, it's very much research-based. It's very hard to know because the brain operates in a very different way than the body does. The body, you can stimulate something and you can see, it makes a flexion. But to see what is consciousness, which is a word that is kind of very, very abstract, what causes consciousness, it's hard to tell. Because you would have to have someone remove that part of their brain and then also have a definition of what consciousness is to be able to test this, which is not very much the case. There are sometimes people who have injuries, but the thing with the brain, again, is it could just be the fact that the brain as an organism isn't whole that could be causing these things. So very, very, very hypothetical, but let's just still go through it anyway. So we have the frontal brain, or the frontal lobe. This is where consciousness is, apparently. The more analytical, logistical awareness of being awareness. This is where we get that, again, apparently. We say this also because we notice in other animals that they don't have as much of a developed frontal brain as we do, and apes have a little bit similar, but not all animals have this frontal lobe as big as ours. So we're guessing that this is kind of what is inducing consciousness on whatever you want to define consciousness as, because consciousness for me is in everything. But there is a certain consciousness that human beings have that is perhaps caused by this frontal lobe, perhaps. Then we have the parietal, right? So the parietal is kind of what deals with the sensory feedback, right? So when senses kind of come in, that starts to create algorithms and things in our head on how to react. And a lot of the time where our thinking patterns come from is inside of this in terms of reaction to things. So like physical reactions that come from some sort of physical stimulus. This is coming in through the parietal. Then we have the occipital, which is the eyes. So visual stimulation goes through here, gets analyzed, and gets sent back out. The eyes connect directly to this part of the brain. This is kind of why we're guessing. This is where most of our visualization is processed. But you can't visualize something without any feedback. So the parietal is kind of there as well. And you have to have some sort of awareness to be aware of that, so that's why the frontal's there. So again, it's very hard to break these things apart and understand how they could work by themselves. It's difficult, but it's the same with the body, right? If you take the bicep muscle and just play it on a plate, it's just like a slug, and it has no kind of function in terms of what it does. And the brain's similar. If you just took the occipital lobe and just plopped it on a plate, you would not be able to say that, it's where visualization comes from. It's just, it needs to work with everything else to create this function for itself. Then we have the temporal. So the temporal starts to deal a little bit with time and space. So spatial awareness, things like that. Awareness of ideas and concepts such as time and movement within space, stuff like this. So we're using this quite a lot whenever we're doing any sort of movement-based activity that uses the brain. But again, you can see how this is linked to everything I've just mentioned, and you can't really separate it. Then we have the cerebellum, which kind of is one of the first things that started to develop on the body. in the brain. It's the lower part of the brain. So just if you see the brain as an image in your head, and then here's the cerebellum. This is something that most animals have, is a little bit of a cerebellum, and it kind of deals with the survival instincts that we deal with. You could also call it the reptilian brain in a sense, that starts to deal with our desires and sexualization and things like that. Again, though, it is necessary to have this for everything else and everything else for this. And then the last one is our brain stem. There are more, don't get me wrong, but these are just all that I'm going through for now. The brain stem is what deals with our involuntary functions. Most of them, like breathing and the basic functions of the body, the heartbeats and stuff like that, tiny. Very, very small is the brain stem. And what it does make you question, or at least start to become aware of, is how you can understand why humans have this different way of thinking, let's put it. Because these areas of the brain, the frontal, temporal, occipital, parietal, are very big in the brain, right? They're huge. They probably make up most of the mass of the brain. The cerebellum and the brainstem, which are very basic functions of an organism that most organisms have, are very small, right? So you don't need a lot of brain mass, per se, to do those things, right? To function from a very basic level. This is why it's very interesting being a human, because functionally, that's taken care of very easily, right? In terms of energy-wise. Everything else is huge. It's a big portion of our energy is used here. So no wonder humans have this different way of thinking and different levels of awareness than other creatures do, because this part of our brain, the mass that other places don't have, or maybe the other beings don't have it as big, is big. So it's working in much more complex ways. The bigger there is, the more complex patterns can exist within it. And that's why we are the thinking creatures, more so in a sense than the movers. There's a link, obviously, but we'll speak more about that as we go lower down. So this is all the central nervous system, right? But the central nervous system cannot operate, again, without the peripheral nervous system. So again, remember, parietal, peripheral, very similar kind of ways of expression. We're bringing the senses into the body. So now we're kind of going from here and here to here. So nerves run throughout your body like roots of a tree. And every nerve ending ends at a muscle or at the skin or at the hair, wherever it is. Every time you feel a pinch, a pull, any form of sensation, it's the nerves. Right? It's the reason why if you burn yourself or if you go into really ice cold water, the nerves start to become numb. It's because you're killing them, essentially. Right? You're taking the oxygen away, or you're providing too much destruction in that area, and then it becomes numb. So if you do burn yourself on your arm, then you'll become numb in that area and the nerves will be dead. There are ways to regrow the nerves through stem cells and stuff like this. But we're not going to get into that. Right now, you just need to know that the nerves run through the entire body, and they are what provide us with the experience of sensation. And they also are what give out the orders to the body as it functions. And that's what we have, the two different things. We have the somatic and the autonomic, right? So in the peripheral nervous system, somatic means that is which is under our control. Voluntary movements. So me doing this, that was a somatic movement, right? It was something I told myself to do. But my heartbeat, I'm not telling my heart to beat. This is an autonomic movement. So it's still existing in this region, but thank goodness I don't have to wake up every morning or even while I'm sleeping and tell my heart to beat, right? It's something that we've developed over evolution to be able to do without even thinking about it. And yes, if you're asking this question, which I hope you are, somatic movements can become autonomic, and autonomic movements can become somatic. Some very, very simple movement should come into your mind right now, which is breath. Breath can be both, very simply. Some are more difficult to become the other, but breath is probably the simplest one, just jump between. Breath is both autonomic and somatic, right? So right now I'm breathing pretty somatically, but if I wanted to, autonomically, if I wanted to breathe somatically, that was more of a somatic breath. But most of the time in our day-to-day, when we're doing things, we're not as aware of our breath not even as we should be, but just as we are when we're taking the time to be aware of the breath. In a bigger way, when we create movement patterns, so this, in the beginning, this is going to feel awkward and is going to be very voluntary. But I can even right now, if I just keep doing this, it can become an autonomic movement that I don't have to think about doing. Something like walking. As a baby, it's a very somatic movement. You have to remember how to walk. But now, it's autonomic. You can just walk without even thinking about it. But you can also change it back. And there are ways to tap into the deeper autonomic movements of the body. Again, by becoming very sensitive through the arts of meditation and mindfulness, you can start to make some autonomic things somatic. For reasons maybe for healing more than anything, where you can start to control your heartbeat to reduce anxiety. You can start to control your lymphatic system to increase detoxification of the body. And again, very hypothetical, very hypothesis-based, all of what I'm telling you. But I do strongly believe it, that I feel like you could bring your autonomic ability to heal somatically up if you go into a deeper state of meditation. And through the art of yoga and getting more sensitive and allowing yourself to fall into different states, you can start to induce these things that are otherwise autonomic, but maybe are a bit broken. And you can fix them and start to guide them again. So, autonomic. We can now separate that into two different parts, right? So we have two different kind of ways that we react to something without us thinking about it. And this is one actively or passively. So we either become engaged or we let it go. So this kind of two states of being we call in neuroscience parasympathetic and sympathetic. So parasympathetic is the letting it go, right? When you come into a parasympathetic state of being, you're relaxed. Whenever you are relaxed about something, your parasympathetic nervous system is activated. This is pretty much up here. For the most part, it obviously taps down a little bit. Everything taps everywhere else. But for the most part, it's up here. Your breath and your heart. So when you start to breathe deeper, when you start to slow yourself down over here, you're starting to engage with the parasympathetic nervous system. Your heartbeat coming to a rest. And then this starts to allow you to relax a bit more, which then goes into your digestion. And then you start to digest food a lot easier. So it's also called the rest and digest state. So when you're doing a high-impact vinyasa class, you're not in your parasympathetic state or dominantly parasympathetic. You're dominantly in the opposite, which is the sympathetic. The sympathetic means that you're acting on some sort of stimulus. So this is a lot to do with the adrenal glands and the release of adrenaline and all these very intensified stimulating hormones throughout the body that make you active, that bring your focus in. And whenever you're doing a sport, whenever you're doing something that is potentially dangerous, even when you're stressing about the future, this is the sympathetic activation of the body, which is something that we go through on a daily basis, but it's also something we've become stuck in. So there is never a point where neither are active because, like I said, these are just concepts, right? Our body doesn't think like this, we think like this. There is always a point where something is sympathetic, something is parasympathetic. Something is yin, something is yang. Something is active, something is deactive. The problem with society at the moment, let's rephrase that, not say problem, the thing with society, what society seems to be in at the moment, is we're sympathetic, right? We're constantly active. We're trying to do things all the time, and in the body, outwardly, it's all about do, 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 do. So we're constantly creating things for ourselves to do on subtle and big levels. The thing with this is you don't allow for a swing back. So everything works in dualities. When there's hot, there's cold. For things to be hot, there needs to be cold. To allow for cold, you need to reduce the heat. So we need to relax. But in order to relax, you need to reduce the amount of action that you're doing. So to go to parasympathetic, yes, you need to go into the sympathetic, but you also need to let it go. And this is where yoga comes in. Because what yoga teaches us to do, not only become aware of the body, But it also teaches us to become aware of the mind, right? And the mind, like I said, kind of equals the brain and the nervous system. So we activate the body and mind. We activate the sympathetic nervous system so that we can let it go. This, for me, is one of the biggest, most amazing things that yoga can teach you, is bodily awareness, so that you know when you're getting into the sympathetic. And once you're in it, you can let it go and allow yourself to go into the parasympathetic. Because what's happened is the sympathetics become autonomic, right? These sympathetic actions of pattern have become autonomic. So we need to make them somatic again. But to do that, we need to be aware of what they are. So we need to bring ourselves into activity. Once you've brought ourselves into activity, there's a very natural thing that happens. Just like a seesaw. When something goes up, it very naturally goes back down. So we bring ourselves into sympathetic so that we can go into our parasympathetic. But we do it with control, with awareness. And this is how we start to affect the relationship of these two and allow ourselves to become more parasympathetic than we are sympathetic. Right? Again, rest and relaxation should be the dominance of your life. It doesn't have to be sympathetic all the time. Remember, again, going back to this idea of energy efficiency. Sympathetic, in a sense, takes fuel, right? So it's taking fuel already. It works a lot with the digestive system, but it shuts the digestive system down. And I was like, okay, it's the digestive system makes the fuel, and then now we have the fuel on storage, and then we start to use it through the sympathetic activation, through adrenaline, through little bursts of energy, blah, blah, blah. What happens next, though, is we just keep using the fuel, right? And I don't mean this even on a very bodily way, because yes, even some really large fat people or obese people, people who have excess body weight, they're still probably too active in the sympathetic nervous system because of this, the brain. Most of the sugars in our body, there's a large percentage that gets used up by the brain, right? And this does a weird thing to the body because the brain's craving sugar. This is usually what happens in obesity. But the body doesn't need the sugar because it's not moving. But the brain's still craving it, so there's a mix of signals. So the brain's saying, give me sugar, give me sugar, let's just say that equals energy. It's the most refined form of energy that the human being has basically created, that gives us an instant shot of like glucose, which is what most muscles and things need to function. So the brain's like, give me sugar, but the body doesn't need it, but it still does it, so it eats the sugar. It takes the sugar. The brain's happy. The body doesn't know what to do with the excess sugar, so it converts it into fat. Right? It thinks, well, like, okay, I can't do anything. I don't have the strength to detoxify it, to turn it into anything else. I'm not burning it off. So it just adds on to the body and equals into body mass, aka what we call adipose tissue, which is fat. Again, fat in the sense of just larger mass. Again, these terms are very confusing because people came up with different definitions that somewhat sounded the same, and now fat means different things depending on the context that you're talking of, right? In food, fat actually means different things to the fat on a human body. The fat in food and the fat in the human body that we speak about when we call someone fat, very different, very, very different, and is usually more due to excess, not even just excess energy, but just excess of something that we're not using up. So, our body now is in this state of constant activity. So we want to be able to bring it into this parasympathetic state. So why yoga is great is we access movement. Remember, we've been living in a world where the brain, which is a new, beautiful gift that has been granted to humanity, we've been using that, but we've forgotten a little bit about this. So now we bring a little bit of body awareness back into the body. We start to use the body, get a little bit of exercise at the same time, gain more body awareness, and then the body relaxes. And guess what happens when the body starts to relax? The brain starts to relax. They work together, right? And then when you create synchronicity, right? Harmony, right? Balance, peace, these are lovely words. When you create that within your own self, within your own being, between mind and body, This is health. This is actually what health means. Not when you're doing too much here and too little here, or too much here and too little here, or too much in both areas, or too little in both areas, but when you're doing the right amount. And how do we know how to get there? Awareness. Right? This is why yoga, for the most part, is about awareness of the body, which then leads to more awareness of the mind. So we start to activate these things. And this is why a yoga practice should be both stimulating and restorative. Right? Even if you think of the most stimulating, like a vinyasa flow, there should be, or even, there's even more than that, Vikram or Ashtanga or something where it's just really, really yang energy. There should be yin in it, because in life there is yin in everything, right? There is always a little bit of yin in everything. So bring yin into that practice, whether it be a longer shavasana or a meditation in between. Whatever it is, bring yin. And then in the reverse order of yin yoga, there is always a little bit of yang. Because when you're in that pose that you're holding for a long period of time, there's a little bit of stimulation happening. It's just subtler. Right? There's stimulation in the fascia, which is then represented through a very probably intense nervous stimulation, which is why you feel discomfort in a lot of yin poses if they're held for a long time. But then that release afterwards brings you the dopamine, the serotonin of the, you can relax. And in order to get those chemical reactions, you need to trigger the brain. So this is why I always say that all of what we're doing here and in yoga itself and in life itself is we're biohacking ourselves. Because before, it would be something that happens naturally. Right? Look at a dog. A dog doesn't wake up in the morning and think, I need to do my upward-facing dogs and downward-facing dogs so that I can go into a more relaxed state. No, it just gets up, stretches, maybe walks around a little bit if it feels like it, or goes back to laying down. And then when it's hungry, it goes to look for food and it eats whatever it can eat, and then comes and lays down again. But it's a very natural order of things. The thing is, we've lost this touch, again, with the brainstem and the cerebellum, if you want to label it in the brain, of these natural instincts that we have. Because we're so here all the time and everything's very visual and very imaginative in the upper quarters of the brain, we've forgotten how to be a bit natural, but it doesn't mean that we can't bring it back through awareness. So now what we have to do is pretend that our body is getting the things it used to get from nature, right? So in nature, usually we would get up, we would get stimulated by the fact that we need to hunt for food. We would have to go through survival. Once we survive something, once we get the food, we can rest, we can digest. Very simple process. Now, you can get food by picking up your phone and ordering it. You don't even have to go out and get it. You can get any convenience has become one of the most amazing, but also one of the most compromising things, ironically, of humankind. So we have to biohack ourselves into getting those same emotions, those same chemical releases that we would before get very naturally. Now we need to give them to ourselves. But thank goodness we have awareness, right? So the gift keeps on giving. So when you think that this thing could be a curse, its curse is also what its gift is. So the fact that we are so up here, we can use this ability to become very self-aware and start to biohack ourselves to balance again. And I promise you, through self-experience, it works. It works in very powerful ways, on a very physiological level. So that's what we start to do, right? And this is what yoga does, is it finds the areas where we need balance. So you'll notice, again, this is very hypothetical, but I've worked with a lot of students, I've done a lot of trainings, it's just something I've noticed. You go through a phase in yoga. Phase 1, you get introduced to yoga, and you probably don't like it. You probably go to a yoga class and you're like, I don't know what they want me to do, I'm stretching, it hurts, there's pain. Or you're like, I'm moving my body for the first time and I don't like it. Or you're a mover and you're like, they're making me sit down and I don't like it. So you go to yoga and then you don't like it. Phase 2, you give yoga another shot and you get really into yoga. And usually what happens, you go down the very physical path. Not all the time, but again, dominantly, You get really into Vinyasa yoga, Ashtanga yoga. You see how great it feels in your body, how great it feels to have such a balanced body, how nice it is to be able to use this energy again, and finding the awareness of of muscle groups that you've always had, but you call them new because you've never used them before, and you get back into the body. Then you start to realize that you don't need to be as much in the body as you are, and you start pulling away slightly. I'm becoming more aware of the fact that, okay, my body feels good now. I don't need to be doing 20 vinyasa classes a week to feel that feeling. I can do 5, or I can do 4 or 3. I don't need to do as much movement as I thought I did because I've kind of compensated for the lack of movement. I have my body awareness back. I know what my body feels good in. So it again becomes more about the quality of the movement that you're doing. And then you start to move into this area of greater awareness. And you start to tap into the mental. So you're like, okay, I've sorted out my body. I know how my body moves a little bit better. Now it's about the mind. It's about the thinking patterns and how you can start to affect that. And how you can change your desires that you're having that leave you with suffering. The things that you do in your life that put you in bad circumstances. Or if you're in bad circumstances, how you react to them in a more positive way. And then yoga becomes much more of a mental thing. So you start stepping away from the asana and going into, if you want to think about it in yoga terms, the last 3 sutras, right? You start going into more of the focusing, the meditating, and then enlightenment essentially towards the end. So you'll notice this in your own practice, that if you're feeling more burnt out, this is probably what needs to happen, is you need to take a step away from asana. And again, it's the joy of the world. It's your body communicating to you. It's saying, you're good. Stop. You're at the place. Go to something else. And in terms of a very anatomical way, it is your nervous system being burnt out. Because like I said, nerves are like electric wires, right? So if you have an electric wire and you stimulate it, bzz, there's a heat that is created in the wire, right? It's the reason why we need rubber conductors around the wire, because if you just had an open loose wire, it would just set on fire and it would just go and it would flame. But there's little rubber things. But even those rubber things can become burnt. So if you stimulate it once, bzz, great. Stimulate it again, bzz, and the intervals become shorter and you start just stimulating it all the time. Bzz, 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 bzz. Eventually, even the rubber is going to melt. That wire is going to set on fire. And that's what happens inside of you. So you stimulate a movement. You do a chaturanga, let's say. Not to pick on chaturangas. I love them, but they're just the most obvious ones to use. You do a chaturanga. You stimulate that whole entire nerve process that goes with doing a chaturanga. Bzz. You do it again. Bzz. Intervals become less and less because you get better or you get more into doing chaturangas. Bzz. Eventually, you're going to burn out not only the muscles, but the nerves that you are using to activate those muscles. And then this usually happens here. So you won't feel it, you'll feel it in the body for sure. Muscle fatigue is like one of the more ways you'll feel it when it comes to a bodily feeling of this burnout. But in terms of a nervous systems type burnout, it's here. And it's when your muscles are having a slight delay in reaction or action. And it's when the brain becomes a little bit foggy. When the brain becomes a little bit heavy, or when it becomes a little bit confused, when it's not as clear as it usually is. This is probably due to some sort of burnout from the nervous system. So this happens on a very physical matter. And then it also happens in a mental way, right? So you get the same stimulation of seeing something every day, or doing something, or thinking a thought every day. And you think that thought every day. And again and again and again. And eventually the intervals become shorter and you burn out yourself in here, or on a very subtler level around here. That is what happens when you have a burnout that is more of a mental burnout. It's because you keep thinking the same way again and again. You keep stimulating the same wires again and again, and you don't allow for variation. And this is when we have a one-track mind, or we just stress about something all the time, or we focus on one thing that we don't need to be focusing on. So what do we need to learn to do? Let go, right? Detachment, very, very powerful word, very often used in Buddhism if you're following that path. But in all levels, even from a psychological level, from a cognitive therapy level, from a neuroscience level, detachment should be something that you learn how to do. how to let go of patterns in your brain. Because if you keep on doing the same thing again and again, no matter what it is, it's going to lead to burnout. So yoga helps you realize this on a very physical way and then transmute that into much more of a mental and more of a subtle energy way. And again, this is where the emphasis of meditation comes in. This isn't really for this lecture. If you are interested in meditation and learning more about meditation, again, reach out to me. It's something that I deal with on a daily basis, that I teach people how to meditate and become more mindful. So reach out to me, send me a message. I usually provide my WhatsApp and my Instagram on the live Q&As. If not, you can just ask Ulu for it and they'll give it to you. And we can speak more about that. But back to the anatomy stuff. What we want to try and do is just release any sort of burnout that was happening on a nervous system level, right? So to pick a nerve that we're going to speak about a little bit more in depthly, the sciatic nerve. What happens here is the sciatic gets caught between the muscles around it, right? So the sciatic nerve runs very similar to like we were speaking about with the psoas muscle, very similar kind of line from the legs up to the body, right? And it is a nerve that gets burnt out very easily, but it is also a nerve that suffers from compression. So if you have any stagnancy or inflammation in the body, so inflammation caused by overactivity or stagnancy caused by underactivity, this nerve gets pressed and pulled. And like I said, nerves are like little pressure, they're electrical, but they're like pressure points too. When there's a weight on it, this is what creates a reaction. So if there's something pressing on the nerves inside of you, then it's going to create a major reaction. And this is usually where a lot of lower back pain comes from. So what can we do in yoga for this? We can learn how to release it, right? So that's kind of all you really need to know in terms of the sciatica. There's much more to say, but the basics are there. There's a nerve, there's a compression around it. How do we release it? This is exactly how. I'm going to ask my amazing friend Monica to come and do a little bit of a sequence that we can do to release this. And you'll notice it's just mostly twists. So we're going to start with the most difficult, I guess, and then go into the easier, more relaxing ones. So Monica will come, stand in the mountain pose just in the middle of the mat. It's okay. Good. And the first one we're going to do is a twisted chair. So you can bring your feet a little bit closer in. Good. Come into your chair pose, hands to the chest. Inhale and exhale, twist to the side. Good. Why are we twisting in a chair? Because we're starting to create a release over here. Right? In the part of the body where the sciatica is being compressed mostly by the quadriceps and the glutes. We're also creating a strengthening in the area that's contracting to help stabilize in that area so that the sciatic nerve is protected from any external influences that might occur, or any twisting or any poking that might happen from something else. Good. And slowly come back up. Do the other side. Keep it balanced. Good. Again, hold for about 5 breaths at max or min. Slowly come back up. Good. Now we're going to go to a twisted high lunge. So step your left foot back. Again, start in high lunge. So with all twists, we inhale and then we exhale into the twist. There we go. Good. Same thing, right? Except now we've elongated this back leg to create a little bit more compression here in the piriformis with the hip and creating that nice strength along the side. Beautiful. Inhale, come back. Step forward back to mountain pose. Take a second. And do the other side. It's good to do it like this. Not do them all at once. So that you give time for the effects to happen. Again, what we're also doing when we're twisting is we're creating a little electronic wave throughout the whole nervous system. Right? What are we working with twists? The spine. So any twist creates a release or some sort of active stimulation for the spine so that afterwards it can relax. Beautiful. Come back. Good. Now we're going to go into something a bit more subtle. A low lunge twist. So come into low lunge. Much easier than the high lunge. If you struggle with the chair or the high lunge twist, do this one first to get it right. Notice that the twist, Monica's chest is completely open. She's using her hands placed together to provide that openness. And again, the twist is happening here, more at the lumbar, reaching into the sacral, right? Easier pose, less compression on the leg, going deeper into the twist probably than in the other two poses because there's more space to relax. And then do the other side. Beautiful. Remember to keep your neck nice and neutral as well so that you're not twisting too much at the neck and that you're just, especially in these more relaxed poses, starting to give space to your spine. Use your breath. Inhale, exhale, twist a little bit deeper. Right, come back. So let's come into your hero's pose. All right, now we're going to go into a thread the needle pose. So this we come into our tabletop. Inhale, open up wide with the one arm. Exhale, thread the needle through and lie on this arm. Beautiful. Another twist. You see how the twist is happening here? This is more relaxed. Why? Because there's not much engagement need for the muscle. If you want to deepen the twist or shift more weight onto the shoulder, also great for the rotator cuffs, you just kick out your left foot or whatever foot is with the hand. So bring it a little bit further out maybe if you can. Yeah, it's fine. Cool. Beautiful. And release. Nice. Take a second. And then we do the other side. Inhale, exhale, twist. Nice. So that nice twist again, very subtle. Notice that all these twists are super subtle. We're not doing anything intense. The sciatica hurts. So if you do any intense twists for now, it's just going to cause a lot of pain. So we're starting with subtle twists and going from there. Beautiful. All right, next one that we're going to do is we're going to do a twisted child's pose. So again, we start, inhale, hand at the chest, and exhale, turn over to the side. Beautiful. Super nice, keeping your legs in a nice child's pose position. Again, more subtle twist. The twist starts to come a little bit more up at the thoracic spine. Again, still just a release here. So this compression of the leg is creating a nice area of engagement here, which is starting to release space all the way along for the nerve, because the nerve runs pretty much from here all the way up and goes into the lower back. Beautiful. Coming to the other side. And this is a routine that you can do every day if you do suffer from sciatic pain, or if you need to give this to someone. This is a great one. So start from the top and go down. I always like to start with activation and go down to relaxation, because like I said, it's like a seesaw. Activate the sympathetic and then go into the parasympathetic. This is a very, very microcosm of what a class should look like. Good. Breathe. All right, now we're going to go into a seated twist. Beautiful. Yeah, cross one leg over the other. Inhale. And exhale, twist. Deeper twist now because we're getting into more relaxed state, right? So now we're a little bit more relaxed. The twist can be a little bit deeper. Of course, if you've done your adjustments, you can always just come up behind, provide a little bit more stability, and just deepen the twist by moving the shoulders. Release. And do the other side. Again, creating just a little bit of nerve stimulation in the spine. This is where all the nerves meet up. This is kind of like the highway that leads to the brain, where all the external roads come to, right? So there's a city, which is the brain, where all the operation and the logistics takes place. The highway to that city is your spine. And then all the country roads, I guess, are what lead to that highway. So now we're just unclogging the highway so that there's more space for energy, feedback, information, electricity, whatever you want to call it, to flow up and down the body. And then we're also, back to the sciatica, releasing all of this muscular tension that is happening in the glute area and in the quad area. Final one, probably the most relaxing, is the supine spinal twist. So this one you can completely let go. There should be barely any tension at all. Again, straightening the legs, crossing the one knee over the other. Yeah, you can do eagles if you want to. And just crossing the body down. Beautiful. Again, this is going very deep. You can see how the twist has now become even more and more deep than it was before. You should feel a lot of the tension kind of being released in this area again from the piriformis. And it allows for a much deeper stretch because there's no need for any sort of muscular engagements. You're just kind of crossing the body over. This one, you can hold for a very long time, very yin pose, and should make you feel very relaxed afterwards. And Monica's chosen the eagle legs, the Garuda legs. You can do it with one leg straight, or you can do it with both knees together. Whatever works for you. Remember, if the pain is intense, do a lesser version. To the other side. Beautiful. And this is something, again, even just this pose to do before you go to sleep, or if you're suffering from any pain in the lower back, any of the nerves of the lower back, anytime you're just feeling like you need a release in the back at all, this is a beautiful one that you can do and just relax into. Remember, your yoga poses don't need to be always in a sequence. If you are doing a yoga class, giving a yoga class, teaching a yoga class, obviously you're going to put this into a sequence. But if you just need it throughout the day, do this little sequence that took us maybe 5 minutes or maybe even less. Good. Then finally, we just relax again like this with the heels down, knees just slightly lifted, compression on that lower back. Allow for all of the space that you've created to just be moved into. Allow for yourself to feel grounded through your sacrum. Again, this groundedness is both spiritual and physically, literally allowing for compression in the sacral spine. That compression on the nerve endings allows for a greater release afterwards. So remember, building up to come down. Good. And then from here, you can also just hug your knees to your chest if you like. And then what would actually be a really great release is to go into a back bend. So you can do any back bend you want to do, Mon. Even if it's just a normal bridge, yeah. Good. Press up, maybe interlace the fingers beneath. Yeah, get up nice and high. Good, and slowly release down. Come into Shavasana, straighten your legs. So this pose, Shavasana, is the #1 parasympathetic activator, right? So it should be in every single class, right? No alignment tips here other than just relax, right? Allow yourself to completely relax. This is just as important as doing a handstand or a headstand or a super advanced vinyasa flow. And sometimes for some people more difficult. Allow yourself to go completely into the parasympathetic here. Right? The best way to do this is silence. Some music, again, sure, great. Use some music as a little bit of a subtle stimulation to get you to a place of peace, and then silence. Allowing for stillness, allowing for nothing, right? Where can we find the least amount of activity? In nothing, in doing nothing, which is a complete of a paradox thing to do, but this is as close as we can get. Because we're not asleep, so we're not doing sleep. We're just allowing ourselves to be a being, right? And this is what Shavasana does. So if you want to activate the parasympathetic after doing all of your practice, so as yin as your practice might be, still do this. Because there's always a little bit of yang. Even in this, there's a little bit of yang, maybe in the mind. But ideally, we want to go as yin as possible here and just completely let go. And allow yourself to just be in the moment. And remember, when we're coming out of something, we want to do it slowly. This is why we speak about moving the toes and the fingers, rolling the joints a little bit from side to side. And doing whatever Mon needs to do to just come back. And then we find our place of 50-50. So if you want to roll onto your favorite side, Mon. And come into a comfortable seated position, meditative position. Just close your eyes for a bit. And this is the second thing. So once you've gone completely parasympathetically relaxed, this is balance. This is life. What we want our lives to be like. A meditative state. I don't want to say 50-50 because I've also come to the idea that it's perhaps not as cut as dry as 50-50, but balanced. As much yin and as much yang as is needed to be neutral, to be in our equilibrium. Right? From here, we are neither too rested nor too active. We are active enough to be seated in a position, but we are rested enough to be still in this position. This is the foundation of meditation, is finding this equilibrium in everything that we do. And so what do? We cultivate it from here. After our Shavasana, after our yoga practice, we come into a meditative space and we allow for our nervous system to equalize. Everything just becomes an allowance. So the activity is the allowance, and then the allowance is the release. So you have, again, a little bit of yang, a little bit of yin, completely neutralizing. And once you neutralize from the nervous system neutralizes the body. Because remember, the wires are what touch the muscles. So when your wires aren't as active, then the muscles aren't as active, and you can come into a complete place of inner and outer harmony. And then, without going too deep, this is also what extends into the external world. So once your body and your mind are at harmony, you'll notice the world around you starts to go into harmony too. Just from you resonating, just from you being, just from you acting from this place of equilibrium and peace and harmony. Beautiful. All right, thanks, Ma. Alrighty. So, this is how we link all this neuroscience, all of this idea of the nervous system and everything into yoga and yoga asana practice, and how we link asana practice into meditation practice, and what's going on a more anatomical level. There's a lot more ways we can explain this. I can definitely go a lot more in depth, for sure. But to be honest, I don't need to. Unless you want to, then you can go deep as you can go, research more, do what I did, and come to this conclusion that all you basically need to know is balance. And that in yoga, all we're doing is balance. Right? So bring this into your self-awareness. Bring this into your next practice. See what is activating your sympathetic nervous system. See what is activating your parasympathetic nervous system. Become more aware. Are you more parasympathetic or sympathetic throughout the day? And start to get yourself into balance through allowance, through awareness, through activation, through being passive, through letting go, through just being and letting yourself be in all states, in all places, at all times. That's it from me. Keep playing with these ideas, again, exploring them just as much as the physical world is a playground for your movements. The mental and the spiritual world is a playground for your thinking patterns, your actions, your belief systems, and your philosophies. So be as playful with your mind as you are with your body. And have a beautiful day. Again, if you need to know any more about any of this, you can always contact me. I'm always up for discussions. And just keep being you. Have an awesome day. Once again, thank you from Ulu Yoga, and see you in the next videos. Peace out.